It was almost unknown in the United States for most of American history. Then war, immigration, and the rise of pizza turned oregano into one of the country's most recognizable herbs. High on the slopes of the Mediterranean, wild oregano flourished long before it became a kitchen staple. The Greeks named it origanon, combining oros for mountain and ganos for joy. This phrase, often translated as joy of the mountain, captured more than the plant's habitat. In ancient myth, oregano was said to be a gift from Aphrodite herself, woven into the world as a symbol of happiness, love, and luck. Brides wore garlands of oregano at their weddings, hoping to bless their unions with the same brightness the herb brought to the hillsides of Greece. Beyond myth, oregano held a respected place in medicine and ritual. The writings of Dioscorides, a 1st century physician, catalogued 4 distinct types: Heracleotic, Onitis, wild, and goat oregano, each with its own therapeutic uses. His text, De Materia Medica, described the herb as aromatic and warming, useful for treating wounds, easing coughs, and even countering poison. Earlier, Hippocratic treatises had already listed oregano for respiratory and digestive complaints, while Theophrastus classified it among the essential aromatic plants of the Greek pharmakon. Oregano's reputation carried into Roman times, where Pliny the Elder noted its place in both gardens and kitchens, and Apicius included it among the seasonings of elite Roman cookery. Archaeological evidence, from illustrated Byzantine manuscripts to frescoes in Pompeii, confirms its presence in daily life, both as a culinary ingredient and as a botanical emblem. For centuries, oregano stood as a thread connecting myth, medicine, and the rituals of home, a legacy that would travel far from its mountain origins. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 4 million Italians crossed the Atlantic and passed through Ellis Island, carrying not only hopes for a new life, but fragments of their old world, sometimes tucked into a suitcase, sometimes sewn into a coat pocket. Among these mementos, dried bundles of oregano traveled quietly from the hills of Campania, Sicily, and Calabria to the crowded tenements of American cities. In neighborhoods like New York's Mulberry Street, Chicago's Halsted, and Philadelphia's South 9th, oregano became a thread tying families to their past. Hanging from kitchen rafters or stored in linen sacks, the herb kept its place in Sunday sauces, meatballs, and rustic breads, even as the outside world remained largely unaware of its presence. For many families, preserving oregano was a ritual. Oral histories recall grandmothers grinding leaves with a mortar and pestle, teaching grandchildren to recognize the scent that meant home. Recipe books, written in looping Italian script, measured out una manciata di oregano secco, a handful of dried oregano, into tomato gravies and stews. The herb's flavor, sharp and earthy, lingered in the air of cramped apartments and behind the counters of small Italian groceries. Newspaper ads in the early 20th century offered fresh oregano from Sicily and oregano di Napoli, sold by the ounce at Little Italies market stalls. These shops, lined with burlap sacks and paper packets, formed the backbone of a small but steady commerce that kept the tradition alive. Inside these enclaves, oregano was more than a seasoning. It was a marker of identity, a way to hold on to the mountains and memories left behind. For decades, its story remained mostly invisible to the wider American palate, quietly waiting for its moment beyond the immigrant kitchen. In 1943, American soldiers disembarked in southern Italy, their senses colliding with a landscape of unfamiliar flavors. For many, the first taste of Neapolitan pizza was a revelation: the thin, blistered crust, the bright tomato, and a dusting of something sharp and aromatic. Veterans' oral histories recall the moment, the scent of oregano rising from a wood-fired oven, mingling with the sea air and the dust of wartime roads. Private John DeLuca, stationed near Naples, described in a later interview how the herb's earthy, peppery bite lingered on his fingers long after the meal had ended. It was nothing like the dried herbs back home. It tasted alive, he remembered. Before the war, oregano's presence in the United States was almost invisible, with annual imports hovering around 30 tons, a quantity that barely supplied the needs of Italian-American enclaves. For most Americans, the herb was unknown, its name absent from mainstream cookbooks and grocery shelves. But in Italy, those soldiers found themselves craving the flavor, writing home about the pizza herb that transformed simple bread and sauce into something unforgettable. Letters described the taste as new but somehow essential, a flavor that felt both ancient and immediate. The war's end brought these sensory memories home. Soldiers returned to American cities and suburbs with a hunger that could not be satisfied by the blandness of wartime rations or the muted flavors of pre-war American cooking. In the years that followed, this craving would ripple outward, turning a once obscure Mediterranean seasoning into a symbol of post-war curiosity and culinary possibility. By the early 1950s, pizza was no longer a secret of Italian-American enclaves. It was quickly becoming a national obsession. In cities and suburbs alike, the number of pizzerias soared. Lombardi's, which first opened its doors in Manhattan in 1905, had once stood almost alone. Now, new pizzerias appeared on every corner, from Chicago's South Side to the strip malls of California. Trade directories from the decade list thousands of new pizza parlors, each one promising the taste that GIS had brought home from Italy: crisp crust, bright tomato, and a generous sprinkle of oregano. For many shop owners, oregano was the finishing touch that set a pizza apart. In a 1957 interview, one Bronx pizzeria owner described how customers would lean over the counter, asking for just a little more of that pizza herb. He kept a tin behind the register, refilled weekly from burlap sacks imported from Sicily or, increasingly, from California's Central Valley, where commercial growers had begun to cultivate oregano for the expanding market. Supermarkets caught on fast. By the mid-1950s, packaged oregano appeared on grocery shelves across the country. Companies like McCormick and Durkee introduced small metal tins labeled Italian oregano, often decorated with Mediterranean motifs. Newspaper ads from 1956 featured oregano alongside other authentic Italian ingredients, inviting home cooks to recreate restaurant flavors in their own kitchens. Recipe booklets slipped into Sunday papers called for a teaspoon of dried oregano in every pizza sauce and meatball mix. This rapid scaling from corner shop to supermarket aisle turned oregano into a fixture of American food culture. What began as a family memory or a soldier's craving soon became an everyday flavor, as common as salt or pepper. Oregano's journey from the mountain slopes of the Mediterranean to the American dinner table was now complete, woven into the taste of modern life. Oregano is not a single plant, but a name that covers distinct species with their own histories and flavors. In the United States, what is labeled as oregano often comes from two sources: Mediterranean oregano, Origanum vulgare, a member of the mint family, and Mexican oregano, Lipia graveolens, which belongs to the verbena family. Botanists and spice buyers point out that, despite sharing a name, these plants are only distant cousins. The difference goes deeper than taxonomy. Essential oil analysis using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry shows that Mediterranean oregano is rich in carvacrol, the compound behind its warm, peppery bite. Mexican oregano, on the other hand, leans heavily on eucalyptol, giving it a sharp, citrusy edge. The USDA classification keeps these species separate, but in American kitchens and on grocery shelves, the lines have blurred. This quiet split in the oregano story shapes not only what is tasted, but what is remembered as authentic flavor. The word oregano, so often taken for granted in an American kitchen, masks a tangle of meanings shaped by both nature and migration. In its Mediterranean homeland, the name pointed to a single plant, Origanum vulgare, rooted in the language of mountains and joy. But as oregano crossed borders and entered new markets, its identity began to blur. In the United States, what is sold as oregano might be the Mediterranean original, or it might be Mexican oregano, Lipia graveolens, a distant botanical cousin with a sharper citrus edge. Grocery shelves rarely clarify the difference. The Fair Packaging and Labeling Act of 1967 aimed to bring some order, requiring that food labels be truthful and informative, yet the rule left plenty of room for ambiguity. Spice companies leaned on familiar names, knowing that a label reading simply oregano could cover a range of flavors and origins. This quiet flexibility reveals how food traditions adapt as they travel, how a single word can stretch to fit new landscapes, new palates, and new commercial realities. The story of oregano in America is not just about a plant, but about the way meaning migrates, changing shape as it moves through kitchens, markets, and time. Oregano, once the joy of the mountain, sacred to Aphrodite, now sits quietly in millions of American kitchens. Its journey, shaped by migration, war, and appetite, reminds us that even the simplest flavor carries centuries of longing, luck, and love. Every sprinkle is a living piece of cultural memory,